The first plume of smoke appeared just after 3 in the afternoon. At first, it was only a thin gray line rising beyond the western hills. Less than 10 minutes later, it had thickened into a black wall rolling beneath the summer sky. Hot winds swept across the dry grasslands, carrying the smell of ash and burning leaves toward Samuel Carter's farm. Samuel stood beside the fence and watched his cattle grow restless. The cows crowded into one corner of the pasture, while the horses stamped the ground and pulled against their gates. They sensed the danger before the town's fire sirens began to wail. "The fire's coming this way," Samuel's son said, his voice trembling. Samuel did not answer. His eyes moved across nearly 80 acres of wheat waiting to be harvested. Beyond the field stood the grain barn, the livestock sheds, and the wooden farmhouse where 3 generations of Carters had lived. If the flames crossed that wheat field, they would not lose only one season's crop. They would lose everything. 2 fire engines roared into the farmyard. Firefighters jumped down and began dragging hoses toward the western fence. Within minutes, however, they discovered that the storage tank beside the barn was less than half full. The irrigation ditch to the south had dried into a cracked channel of mud. Then the wind changed. A wall of flame rose above the trees and swept over the hillside, consuming brush and dead grass in seconds. Glowing embers spun into the air, traveled hundreds of yards, and landed inside Samuel's wheat field. Small fires appeared in several places at once. The fire chief shouted for everyone to fall back. "Move the livestock. Get the family out of here now." Samuel remained where he was. In the center of the field, an old windmill turned slowly in the hot wind. Rust covered its iron frame, and the pump beneath it had not been used since Samuel's father was a young man. No one else paid any attention to it. But Samuel did. As the fire continued to advance, he remembered something his father had told him many years ago. As long as that windmill can turn, this land has not truly run out of water. Fire Chief Daniel Mercer stepped out of the lead engine and stared across the western field. He had fought grass fires for more than 20 years, and he knew what the wind could do when the ground had been dry for weeks. The flames were moving faster than a person could run. Each gust pushed them farther through the wheat, scattering burning debris ahead of the main fire. Mercer raised his radio. "Unit 2, protect the barn. Unit 3, move to the south fence. We're losing the western line." A firefighter opened the valve on the nearest hose. The water came out strong for several seconds, then weakened to a thin stream. "The tank's almost empty," someone shouted. Mercer looked toward the dry irrigation ditch, then toward the road behind the farmhouse. The nearest reliable hydrant was miles away. By the time another tanker arrived, the flames would already be inside the farmyard. Samuel walked toward him. "There's water under that windmill," he said. Mercer followed Samuel's gaze. In the middle of the field stood the old iron structure, turning slowly above the smoke. Its blades creaked with every rotation. Weeds surrounded the base, and part of the wooden platform had collapsed years earlier. "That thing?" Mercer asked. "It used to pump from a deep well. When was the last time it worked?" Samuel hesitated. "Before I was born." Mercer's expression hardened. "We don't have time to experiment with an antique." "The pump may still be connected." "Maybe," Mercer said. "That field will be burning from one end to the other in minutes." Samuel pointed toward the base of the tower. "My father said the old well never went dry." Mercer shook his head. "Your father isn't here, and that pump hasn't moved in decades." Another explosion of flame rose from the western fence. A line of fire had reached the first rows of wheat. Mercer turned to his crew. "Forget the field, save the house and barn, prepare for evacuation." Then he looked back at the windmill. "It's useless, Samuel. Leave it." The words seemed to disappear beneath the roar of the approaching fire. But Samuel heard them clearly. He looked at the old blades turning above the smoke. Then he looked at the dry hoses lying across his yard. The fire chief saw rusted machinery. Samuel saw the last source of water left on the farm. Samuel watched the firefighters pull their hoses back toward the barn. The order to abandon the field had already been given. His daughter-in-law was loading family photographs and important papers into a truck. His son was opening the cattle gates, trying to drive the frightened animals toward the eastern pasture. Everyone was preparing to leave. Samuel turned toward the windmill. The old structure stood between him and the approaching flames. Its iron legs were buried beneath weeds, and the wooden cover over the well had nearly disappeared under years of dirt. The blades still turned, slowly but steadily, pushed by the same wind that was driving the fire toward the farm. "Dad, we have to go!" his son shouted. Samuel walked toward the workshop instead. He pulled open the door and searched through rusted tools, broken chains, and boxes that had not been touched in years. From the back wall, he took a heavy wrench, a hammer, and an old metal oil can. His son followed him inside. "What are you doing?" "Getting that pump running." "The fire chief said it's useless." "The fire chief never knew this farm." His son stared at him. "Neither of us has ever seen that pump work." Samuel stopped beside an old wooden shelf. When he was a child, his father had often taken him to the windmill on summer mornings. The old man would place one hand against the pipe and listen to the movement deep below the ground. "The well is deeper than the drought," his father used to say. Samuel had always assumed it was simply one of his father's stories, but years earlier, while repairing the barn floor, he had found a faded drawing of the farm's original irrigation system. A line ran from the windmill well to several buried pipes beneath the wheat field. Those pipes had once fed shallow irrigation channels. If even one section remained open, the water could still be spread across the dry ground. Samuel gathered the tools and stepped outside. The smoke had grown thicker. Ash fell around him like black snow. At the edge of the field, flames were already moving through the first rows of wheat. His son grabbed his arm. "You could get trapped out there." Samuel looked at the house, the barn, and the land his family had worked for generations. "If we leave now, there may be nothing to come back to." He pulled his arm free and started toward the windmill. After a moment, his son picked up another toolbox and followed him. Samuel and his son reached the windmill as ash swirled around its rusted legs. Up close, the structure looked worse than Samuel remembered. Several bolts were missing, one support beam had split, and the pump housing was buried beneath hard soil and tangled weeds. The connecting rod still moved with every turn of the blades, but it stopped several feet above the ground. Whatever it had once powered was hidden below. Samuel dropped to his knees and began clearing the base with his hands. "Look for a metal plate," he told his son. "There should be an access cover." They scraped away dirt, roots, and stones, while the fire crackled louder behind them. After several minutes, the edge of a rectangular iron panel appeared beneath the soil. Together, they forced a crowbar under it. The cover resisted at first. Then the rusted seal broke with a sharp crack, releasing a breath of cold, damp air from below. Beneath the panel was a narrow chamber lined with stone. An old piston pump stood inside, connected to a thick iron pipe disappearing into the darkness. Leather seals hung dry and stiff around the joints. A second pipe ran horizontally toward the field. Samuel wiped the grime from a brass plate attached to the pump. The stamped numbers were barely visible. 1920. His son stared at it. "This has been down here for more than 100 years. Samuel turned the flywheel by hand. It moved only a fraction before locking in place. "Not broken," he said, "seized." He poured oil onto the shaft and worked the wheel back and forth. Rust flakes fell into the chamber. Slowly, the mechanism began to move. Then Samuel noticed an iron lever behind the pump. He pulled it. Somewhere beneath them, a valve shifted with a deep metallic groan. A faint sound followed. Not the sound of fire. The sound of water moving through a pipe. Samuel placed his hand against the iron casing. The metal was cold. "The well is still alive," he said. Above them, the windmill blades turned faster as the hot wind strengthened. For the first time, the old connecting rod began to move the pump. But instead of water, the machine answered with a dry, violent knock. The pump hammered beneath the windmill, but no water rose through the pipe. Samuel leaned over the open chamber and watched the piston jerk against years of rust. Each movement sent a dull vibration through the stone walls. The mechanism was turning, but something inside was resisting it. "The rod is moving," his son said. "Why isn't it pumping?" Samuel reached into the chamber and touched one of the leather seals. It cracked beneath his fingers. The seals have dried out. A gust of wind pushed smoke across the field. Both men coughed and covered their faces. The nearest flames were now close enough for them to feel the heat. Samuel climbed out and opened the toolbox. They had no replacement parts designed for a machine built in 1920. All they had were fence wire, strips of old harness leather, grease, bolts, and a short length of rubber hose. Samuel cut a piece from the leather harness and soaked it with oil. His son wrapped it around the piston joint while Samuel tightened it with wire. The first repair slipped loose almost immediately. The second held, but air hissed through another cracked connection. They coated the joint with grease, pressed rubber around it, and secured everything with metal clamps. The repair looked rough, but the piston began moving more smoothly. Then the drive chain snapped. The broken links fell into the dirt. His son stared at them. "That's it." Samuel picked up the chain. "No, that is one broken link." Using a hammer and a fencing staple, he forced the damaged ends together. His son held the chain steady, while sparks jumped from the metal. Behind them, a firefighter ran toward the windmill. "The fire chief says you have 2 minutes," he shouted. "After that, everyone leaves." Samuel reattached the chain and signaled to his son. "Turn the release lever." The blade spun faster. The repaired chain tightened. The rod dropped, and the pump began to move again. One stroke, then another. The machine shook so violently that dust fell from the chamber walls. Still, no water came. Samuel pressed his hand against the outlet pipe. It was cold, but empty. The fire was getting closer. Their time was almost gone. Then Samuel noticed a small cap on top of the pump housing. He stared at it, and an old memory returned. His father pouring water into the machine before every summer season. Samuel finally understood what they had forgotten. The pump had to be primed. Samuel twisted the small cap from the top of the pump. The opening beneath it was dry. He now remembered why his father had always carried a bucket to the windmill at the beginning of each irrigation season. A piston pump could not pull water through an empty pipe. First, the chamber had to be filled so the seals could create suction. "Get water," Samuel told his son. His son looked toward the fire engine. "The tank is nearly empty." "Anything we have." They ran back toward the farmyard. Firefighters were spraying the remaining water across the walls of the barn, trying to protect it from falling embers. No one could spare even a single bucket. Samuel's son opened the truck and pulled out a metal container. It held the family's drinking water, the supply meant for the evacuation. "This is all that's left," he said. Samuel looked at the flames spreading across the wheat. Then he took the container. "If the pump fails, we lose the water. If it works, we may save the farm." They rushed back to the windmill. Chief Mercer was waiting beside the tower. "Time's over," he said. "The fire has crossed the western line." Samuel removed the cap and began pouring. Mercer grabbed his arm. "That is your drinking water." Samuel pulled free. "It is also our last chance." The water disappeared into the pump chamber. Samuel replaced the cap and tightened it with the wrench. "Release the drive." His son pulled the lever. The windmill groaned as the connecting rod began to rise and fall. The pump slammed once, twice, then settled into a rough rhythm. Samuel watched the outlet pipe. Nothing came out. The machine coughed. A small burst of muddy air escaped from the pipe, followed by silence. His son looked at him. "Did we waste it?" Samuel pressed his ear against the iron casing. Deep below, he heard a faint gurgling sound. "Again," he said. The windmill completed another rotation. The piston dropped, but the drive chain slipped and struck the housing. The pump stopped. Chief Mercer pointed toward the farmyard. "Enough! Leave it and get into the trucks." Samuel stared at the silent machine. Smoke had darkened the sky, and the heat against his back was becoming unbearable. For one terrible moment, it seemed the fire chief had been right. Then a single drop of brown water fell from the outlet pipe. Samuel stared at the drop beneath the outlet pipe. Then another fell. And another. The pump gave a deep metallic groan as the piston pulled against the column of water below. Muddy foam pushed through the pipe, followed by a thin brown stream. "It's coming," Samuel whispered. His son grabbed the slipped chain and forced it back onto the drive wheel. Samuel tightened the guide bolt while the windmill blades turned above them. The pump began striking again. 1 stroke. 2 strokes. 3. The weak stream suddenly surged forward, splashing across the dry ground. For a moment, no one moved. Then clear water followed the mud. It poured from the iron pipe in a steady rush. Samuel's son laughed, but Samuel was already searching through the weeds near the base of the tower. He found the old distribution lever almost buried beneath the soil and pulled with both hands. Nothing happened. The lever had rusted in place. Chief Mercer stepped closer. His expression had changed. "Where does that pipe lead?" "To the irrigation channels," Samuel said, "if they're still open." The flames were less than a field away now. Sparks landed around the windmill, igniting patches of dry grass. Mercer called 2 firefighters over. "Help him!" Together, they struck the rusted lever with a hammer. On the 3rd blow, it broke free. A heavy valve shifted underground. The water stopped flowing from the outlet pipe. Samuel's son looked alarmed. Then a dark line appeared in the soil several yards away. Water burst from a cracked wooden gate and poured into a shallow channel hidden beneath the wheat. The old ditch filled quickly, carrying water toward the burning western edge of the field. Samuel ran alongside it, clearing weeds and broken boards with his boots. His son opened a second gate, and the stream divided into 2 narrow branches. Mercer raised his radio. "Move the hoses to the irrigation line. Use the ditch as a supply point." The firefighters rushed into position. Water spread across the dry ground, soaking wheat stubble and flattening ash. Steam rose where the first flow reached the smaller flames. The windmill turned faster in the hot air, driving the old pump without pause. What had begun as a single muddy drop was becoming a moving wall of water. Samuel looked toward the approaching fire. For the first time that afternoon, it no longer seemed unstoppable. Water raced through the forgotten irrigation channels, spreading across the western edge of the wheat field. Chief Mercer immediately changed his orders. "Cut a line from the north fence to the barn," he shouted into his radio. "Everything between the ditch and the buildings." Firefighters dragged their hoses to the newly filled channel. One crew dropped a portable intake pump into the flowing water, while another opened the nozzle toward the advancing flames. This time, the stream did not weaken. The old windmill continued turning, lifting water from deep beneath the farm and feeding the ditch faster than the firefighters could drain it. Samuel and his son ran ahead of the flow, breaking open smaller gates along the irrigation system. Water spread into the dry furrows between rows of wheat, darkening the soil and flattening the brittle stalks. But the fire was still coming. A wall of flame rolled across the western field, driven forward by the wind. Burning wheat collapsed in waves, and smoke swallowed the sky until the sun became a dim red circle. "Everybody back!" Mercer shouted. The crews retreated behind the flooded section. The first flames reached the wet ground. They rose sharply, consuming the last strip of dry wheat, then slowed as they struck the soaked soil. Steam exploded upward. The fire hissed and twisted, searching for fuel that was no longer there. For several tense seconds, no one knew whether the barrier would hold. Then the flames began to shrink. Mercer raised his arm. "Now!" 3 hoses opened at once. Water struck the weakened fire from different directions. Firefighters advanced step by step, using the flooded furrows as protection beneath their boots. Samuel's son redirected another irrigation gate, sending a fresh surge toward a burning section near the barn. A gust of wind carried embers over the wet line. Several landed on the roof of the grain barn. Samuel saw the smoke first. He grabbed a hose and climbed onto a wagon beside the wall. Mercer joined him, directing the stream upward until the glowing embers washed from the roof. Below them, the irrigation channels continued to fill. The fire had not been defeated, but it had lost its speed. What had once been a dry field waiting to burn had become a barrier of mud, water, and steam. Mercer looked toward the windmill turning through the smoke. Then he looked at Samuel. "Keep that pump running," he said. "It's holding the entire western line." The windmill kept turning through the smoke. Its blades groaned with every revolution, but the old pump continued drawing water from beneath the farm. The irrigation channels overflowed, spreading a wide band of mud across the western field. Chief Mercer watched the fire line carefully. The flames still burned fiercely along the northern edge, where dry grass had escaped the water. If that section broke through, the fire could circle behind the barn and trap everyone in the yard. "Shift 2 crews north," Mercer ordered. "Samuel, can you send more water that way?" Samuel looked across the field. "There's one more gate near the old fence." He and his son ran toward it while firefighters attacked the weakened flames. Smoke pressed low over the ground, making every breath painful. The heat was still intense, but the flooded soil slowed the fire enough for them to move. They found the final irrigation gate buried beneath weeds and ash. Samuel pulled the handle. It did not move. His son struck the hinge with a shovel, but the metal remained locked. Behind them, the northern flames surged higher. "Again!" Samuel shouted. They hit the gate together. The rusted latch snapped. Water rushed through the opening and spread across the last dry strip of field. It moved in a broad sheet, soaking the grass just seconds before the fire reached it. The flames struck the wet ground and broke apart. Mercer saw the opening. "Advance!" The firefighters moved forward in a single line. Hoses swept from side to side, knocking down the remaining flames while steam rolled around their boots. The fire tried to climb along the fence, but Samuel's son opened another cut in the channel and sent water directly beneath it. The wooden posts blackened, hissed, and stopped burning. Minute by minute, the wall of fire became scattered patches. Then those patches became smoke. At the edge of the field, the last tall flame folded under the force of 3 hoses and disappeared into a cloud of steam. For several seconds, no one spoke. The only sounds were the windmill turning and water moving through the old channels. Mercer lowered his radio. "The western line is contained," he said. Samuel looked toward the barn, the house, and the cattle gathered safely beyond the eastern pasture. All of them were still standing. The fire had reached the farm, but it had not taken it. By sunset, the worst of the fire was over. Smoke drifted above the blackened wheat while firefighters moved through the field, soaking the last hot spots. Nearly half the crop had burned, but the farmhouse, livestock sheds, and grain barn were still standing. At the center of the damaged land, the windmill continued to turn. Its blades moved slowly as the evening wind weakened. Below, water still ran through the old irrigation channels, leaving a dark, wet firebreak across the western field. Samuel stood beside the pump with soot on his face, and grease ground into his hands. His son sat nearby, exhausted, watching the final streams disappear into the mud. Chief Mercer approached them. He studied the harness leather wrapped around the piston, the fencing wire holding the repaired chain, and the faded brass plate fixed to the pump housing. Then he looked across the wet strip where the fire had finally lost its strength. "I was wrong," Mercer said. Samuel wiped his hands against his shirt. "You made the decision you believed would keep people alive." Mercer shook his head. "I looked at the rust and stopped looking." He rested one hand on the iron pipe. "This pump did not put out the whole fire, but it gave us water where we needed it, and enough time to hold the line." Samuel looked up at the turning blades. It remembered its job. In the following weeks, Mercer sent a crew back to help restore the system. They replaced the broken chain, fitted new seals, cleared the buried channels, and marked the old well on the department's emergency map. Samuel kept the original brass plate. He wanted the date to remain visible. Other farmers soon began checking the forgotten equipment on their own land: abandoned cisterns, hand pumps, irrigation gates, and wells hidden beneath weeds. Not everything worked, but some of it did. Months later, Samuel stood beneath the repaired windmill with his grandson. Fresh wheat had begun to rise through the burned soil, thin and green against the remaining ash. The boy placed a hand on the pump. Why did everyone think it was useless? Samuel looked toward the field. "Because they saw what it looked like," he said, "not what it was still connected to." A fire engine passed on the distant road, leaving fresh tracks along the edge of the field. Above Samuel, the old blades continued to turn. Deep underground, the well waited, silent, cold, and full.